Let's start with the man at the center of it all, Jonathan Roumie, the man who plays Jesus. Now, before we even get into his beliefs, I want you to think about something for a second. Imagine being chosen, out of everyone in the world, to portray the Son of God on screen. Imagine carrying that weight every single day on set. Imagine looking into the camera and delivering the words of Jesus with millions of people watching, judging, feeling, and being moved to tears. That is the reality Jonathan Roumie lives with every time he steps in front of that camera. And the question everyone wants to know is, does he actually believe in what he's portraying? Well, the answer is yes. But it goes so much deeper than a simple yes. Jonathan was baptized Greek Orthodox, but today he identifies as Catholic. Not just any kind of Catholic, though. He describes himself as a born-again Catholic. Now that phrase alone tells you everything. A born-again Catholic isn't someone who just shows up to church on Sunday and calls it a day. It's someone who has had a genuine, personal, life-changing encounter with their faith. Someone who chose it again, deliberately, consciously, and wholeheartedly. And that is exactly what Jonathan did. He didn't just accept the role of Jesus and move on with his life. He surrendered to it. He leaned into it in a way that changed him from the inside out. In interviews, Jonathan has spoken openly about how portraying Jesus has deepened his faith in ways he never expected. He has said that the show has been a continual evolution for him spiritually. Think about what that means. Every season, every scene, every line of dialogue has been pushing him further and further into his relationship with God. Most actors talk about getting into character. Jonathan talks about getting closer to God. That's not something you can fake. That's not something that comes from a script or a director's notes. That's real. That's personal. That's a man who genuinely believes in what he's doing. He once shared something that stopped me completely in my tracks. When asked what he would say to Jesus if he had the chance to sit down with him over a cup of coffee, Jonathan's answer was simply this: "How did I do?" Just 3 words. But those 3 words carry the weight of the world. You can feel the vulnerability in that answer. You can feel the reverence. You can feel a man who has poured everything he has into this role and genuinely hopes, deep in his soul, that he got it right. That he honored the person he was portraying, that he didn't fall short. That answer alone tells you more about Jonathan Roumie's faith than any interview ever could. But there's more. Jonathan has also shared that whenever he travels to a new city or a new country, the very first thing he does is find the nearest Catholic church. Not a restaurant, not a hotel room, not a sightseeing spot. A church. Because for Jonathan, feeling the presence of Jesus isn't something that stays on set. It's something he carries with him everywhere he goes. And that kind of devotion, that kind of consistency, is rare. Especially in Hollywood, where faith is often treated as something private or even something to be ashamed of. Jonathan wears his faith like armor. He doesn't hide it. He lives it. And then there's something he shared about filming the crucifixion scene that I genuinely cannot stop thinking about. Jonathan said that before filming those scenes, he asked God to allow him some sense of what that experience would actually feel like. And he said that God didn't disappoint. He said it's something he is still actively processing. Let that sink in for a moment. He's still processing it. Not just emotionally as an actor, but spiritually as a believer. Whatever he experienced during those scenes left a mark on him that didn't go away when the cameras stopped rolling. And I think that says everything about the kind of man Jonathan Roumie is. He didn't just play Jesus. In many ways, Jesus changed him. Now, you might be wondering, does every cast member share this level of faith and devotion? And honestly, that's where things start to get really interesting, because the answer is absolutely not. And that contrast, that beautiful, complicated, sometimes controversial contrast, is exactly what makes this cast so fascinating to talk about. Some of them come from completely different religious backgrounds. Some of them have kept their beliefs entirely private, and some of them have made headlines for all the wrong reasons. So let's keep going, because we are just getting started.
Let's talk about Luke Dimion, the man who plays one of the most controversial, most debated, and most emotionally complicated figures in all of biblical history. Judas Iscariot. Now just think about that for a second. Out of every role in The Chosen, out of every character Dallas Jenkins could have cast anyone for, the role of Judas might be the heaviest one to carry. Because Judas isn't just a villain in a story, he's the most infamous betrayer in human history. His name has been used as an insult for centuries. His legacy is one of shame, guilt, and eternal condemnation in the minds of millions of believers around the world. So who is the man behind that role? And what does he actually believe? Luke Dimian is an Egyptian American, and he grew up in the Coptic Orthodox Church. Now, if you're not familiar with the Coptic Orthodox Church, let me give you a little context, because it's genuinely fascinating. The Coptic Church is one of the oldest Christian denominations in the entire world. It traces its roots all the way back to the 1st century, founded in Egypt by Saint Mark the Evangelist himself. This is not a modern church. This is not a recent denomination that emerged a few hundred years ago. This is ancient Christianity, the kind that has survived persecution, survived centuries of pressure, survived everything the world has thrown at it. And Luke grew up inside that tradition. So when it comes to biblical knowledge, when it comes to understanding the stories of the Old and New Testament, Luke didn't come into The Chosen as an outsider. He came in as someone who had been living inside these stories his entire life. He has shared that he always had a deep love for the Old Testament growing up, that he had read the Bible, understood the stories, sat with them, and carried them with him long before he ever auditioned for The Chosen. So, when he was cast as Judas, he didn't approach the role as an actor who needed to go research a historical figure. He approached it as a believer who had grown up hearing this story in church, and now had the extraordinary opportunity to bring it to life. And that changes everything about how he plays the role. Because when you watch Luke as Judas, there is a humanity there that makes you deeply uncomfortable in the best possible way. He doesn't play Judas as a cartoon villain. He plays him as a man, a flawed, broken, tragically misguided man. And that interpretation comes directly from his faith and his compassion. Because here is where Luke says something that honestly stopped me in my tracks when I first heard it. He has spoken about how he approaches Judas not just with understanding, but with genuine sympathy. He believes that there is more to Judas than greed, more to him than simply being a puppet of the devil, or a man who was purely evil at his core. Luke has said that his name is cursed, and that he is vilified, of course, but that he has also had many conversations with people, even within his own Coptic community, who genuinely feel heartbroken for Judas. Heartbroken. Not angry, not disgusted. Heartbroken. And Luke says he believes there is real room to feel sympathy for him, even to mourn him, because the one terrible thing Judas did hurt him so deeply, destroyed him so completely, that he took his own life. Now, I want to pause here for a moment because I think this is one of the most profound things any cast member of The Chosen has ever said publicly. We live in a world where everything is black and white, where people are either heroes or villains, where one mistake defines you forever. And here is Luke Dimian, a man raised in one of the oldest Christian traditions on earth, standing up and saying that even Judas deserves to be mourned, that even the most condemned figure in biblical history was still a human being capable of being understood. That is not a small thing to say. That takes courage, that takes deep faith and even deeper compassion. And it completely reframes the way you watch him on screen once you know that's how he truly feels. But Luke's story doesn't end there, because what makes his journey on The Chosen even more remarkable is the weight he carries off screen because of this role. Think about what it means to walk through life as the man who plays Judas. Think about the comments he must receive, the looks, the people who see him and immediately associate him with betrayal, and yet Luke carries that with grace. He has talked about how this role has pushed him deeper into his faith, rather than pulling him away from it. How playing someone so broken has made him more grateful for grace, more aware of how quickly one decision can change everything, more committed to understanding people rather than judging them. And I think that is a beautiful thing, a genuinely beautiful thing. Now let's move to someone whose beliefs have sparked more speculation and more online debate than almost anyone else in the entire cast, Vanessa Benavente, the woman who plays Mary, the mother of Jesus. And before I even tell you what we know, I want you to think about the weight of that role for just a moment. Mary is not just a character in The Chosen. To billions of Christians around the world, Mary is sacred. She is the most revered woman in all of human history. She is the mother of God. And the woman chosen to portray her on screen is someone whose personal faith is, to put it gently, a complete mystery. Because here is the thing that surprised so many people when they found out. Vanessa Benavente is not a Christian. Let that land for a second. The woman who looks into the eyes of the actor playing Jesus and calls him her son. The woman whose portrayal of Mary has moved countless believers to tears. The woman who delivers some of the most spiritually loaded scenes in the entire show. She is not a Christian, and what's even more fascinating is that she has never publicly revealed what she does believe. She hasn't said she's agnostic, she hasn't said she's atheist, she hasn't said she's spiritual but not religious. She has simply kept that part of herself private, which is entirely her right. But what she has said is this. When she talks about Mary, she speaks about her with profound respect. She highlights Mary's strength, her unshakable faith, her devotion, her courage. And she says those qualities genuinely inspire her as a woman and as a human being. So what does that tell us? It tells us that you don't have to share someone's faith to honor it. You don't have to believe what they believed to recognize the beauty and the power of how they lived. And in many ways, I think Vanessa's portrayal of Mary is a reminder that faith can reach people in unexpected ways, through unexpected vessels. And honestly, watching her on screen, knowing what we now know, makes her performance even more remarkable to me, because she is bringing to life a woman she doesn't share a religion with, and she is doing it in a way that feels completely real, completely honest, and completely full of love. Now let's talk about someone whose story genuinely moved me in a way I wasn't expecting. Paris Patel, the man who plays Matthew, the tax collector turned apostle. And before we get into his beliefs, I want you to understand something about the role itself because it adds a whole new layer to everything. In The Chosen, Matthew is portrayed as a man on the autism spectrum. And that creative decision by Dallas Jenkins was not taken lightly. It was deliberate, it was thoughtful, and it was risky. Because portraying autism on screen in a way that feels authentic and respectful rather than stereotypical and shallow is incredibly difficult. And the fact that Paris has pulled it off so convincingly, so beautifully, so powerfully, is something that deserves far more recognition than it gets. Now, when it comes to his faith, Paris was raised Hindu, that much we know. But when it comes to his current personal beliefs, Paris has made a conscious and deliberate choice to keep that private. And I want to be very clear about something. I think that deserves nothing but respect. Not every person of faith needs to announce their beliefs to the world. Not every spiritual journey needs to be public. Some people have a relationship with God or with something greater than themselves that is deeply personal, deeply intimate, and entirely their own. And Paris Patel seems to be one of those people. He hasn't given us a label. He hasn't given us a denomination or a category to put him in. And honestly, maybe that's exactly how it should be. But here's what Paris has given us, and it is more than enough to understand the kind of person he is. He has spoken extensively about what playing Matthew means to him, not just as an acting opportunity, not just as a career milestone, but as something that feels like a calling, like a purpose. He has described the role as giving him a sense of direction and meaning in his life that he hadn't felt before in quite the same way. And when you hear him talk about Matthew, when you watch his eyes light up and his voice soften, you realize that this is not a man going through the motions. This is a man who genuinely feels like he was put in this role for a reason. And the reason becomes even clearer when you hear about the messages he has received from fans. Because Paris once shared, in an interview that I found deeply moving, that he had received messages from parents of children who are on the autism spectrum. Parents who reached out to him with tears in their words, thanking him for the way he portrays Matthew. Thanking him for showing their children a hero who thinks and experiences the world differently. Thanking him for making their kids feel seen on screen in a way they never had before. And Paris became visibly emotional talking about those messages. You could see it on his face, you could hear it in his voice. This wasn't an actor talking about fan mail. This was a human being told that his work had genuinely changed someone's life. He has said that he believes God uses him as a vessel. That through his portrayal of Matthew, something greater than himself is reaching people and touching lives in ways he could never manufacture on his own. And I think that is one of the most beautiful things about The Chosen as a whole. It brings together people from completely different backgrounds, different beliefs, different traditions, and uses all of them to tell one story. A story that somehow manages to reach into the hearts of millions of people around the world, regardless of where those people come from or what they believe. And Paris Patel, a man raised Hindu who keeps his current faith private, is right at the center of that, quietly, powerfully, and meaningfully. Now let's talk about Elizabeth Tabish, the woman who plays Mary Magdalene. And if you know anything about Mary Magdalene as a biblical figure, you know that she is one of the most misunderstood, most debated, and most fascinating women in all of Scripture. For centuries, she was painted as a sinner, as a woman of questionable reputation, as someone who needed to be saved and cleaned up before she could be worthy of Jesus. And then scholars and theologians began pushing back on that narrative, arguing that Mary Magdalene was actually one of the most devoted, most courageous, and most spiritually significant figures in the entire New Testament. She was the first person to see the risen Jesus. Let that sink in. Out of everyone, it was Mary Magdalene who was there first. And Elizabeth Tabish gets to bring that woman to life every single time she steps on set. Elizabeth was raised Catholic, so unlike some of her castmates, she comes to this role with a faith background that directly connects to the story she's telling. But what makes Elizabeth's spiritual journey so compelling is that it hasn't been a straight line. She has been very open about the fact that there were moments in her life, particularly during some of her darkest and most difficult periods, where her faith wavered, where she found herself questioning, where the certainty she had grown up with started to feel less certain. And I think that honesty, that willingness to admit that faith isn't always easy or comfortable or unwavering, is something that a lot of people deeply relate to. Because faith for most people isn't a constant, it's a journey. It rises and falls, it gets tested, it gets questioned, and sometimes it comes back stronger than ever because of those very tests. And that is exactly what happened for Elizabeth. She has shared that through her darkest moments, through all the questioning and the doubt, she eventually came to a realization that God had been there the whole time. Not absent, not distant, present. Just present in ways she hadn't recognized or acknowledged in the moment. And when she arrived at that realization, it didn't just restore her faith, it deepened it. It made it more her own, more personal, more real. And you can feel that depth in the way she plays Mary Magdalene. There is a tenderness in her performance that doesn't come from technique alone. It comes from someone who knows what it feels like to be lost and then found, to be broken and then healed, to be in the dark and then suddenly, unexpectedly, see the light. But Elizabeth doesn't stop there, because she has also been very open about something that many people in Christian communities find uncomfortable to talk about: the intersection of faith and politics. Elizabeth describes herself as both a devoted Christian and a hardcore leftist. And she has spoken about how those two identities are not contradictory in her mind, even though the broader culture often treats them as if they are. She has pointed out that many liberal Christians feel enormous pressure to stay quiet about their faith, because the moment they identify as Christian, people automatically assume they hold a certain set of political views. And Elizabeth refuses to accept that assumption. She believes that Jesus himself stood for the marginalized, for the forgotten, for the people that society pushed aside. And so for her, her political convictions and her faith convictions don't just coexist, they come from the same place. Now I know that for some people watching this, that might be a point of disagreement. And that's okay. Faith is personal, and people understand it differently. But what I appreciate about Elizabeth is the courage it takes to say that out loud in a public space, knowing that it will upset